for watching another episode of Insightful Principles. In today's content, I really want to break down a recent interview that I got a chance to watch by Stanley Druckenmiller on CNBC, and he was really talking about just his market outlook for 2023 and how we may possibly be moving into a global recession due to the fact that the amount of debt that the U.S. has and a lot of just our monetary and fiscal policies here in America. There are a lot of prevalent issues going on right now with just the interest debt on the payments that the government owes on their debts is becoming much higher than the actual tax revenues that are coming into America. So I want to break all of that down throughout this video, really describe, what is a deficit, what is the surplus, what this means for just the economy, and what are some things to keep in mind as an investor with navigating this type of environment. If you all could do me a huge favor, if you could please like, subscribe, and share this video. Don't forget hit that notification bell below so you can be notified every week when I drop content. Now, I want to also highlight here Stanley Druckenmiller. He is a profound hedge fund manager. He's actually a billionaire. His net worth is somewhere around $6 billion, and he has never lost money with managing risk as a fund manager. In fact, he has about a 30% annual return. So this is definitely a person that I'm listening to whenever I hear him talking about the economy, talking about what our fiscal policy is right now with the government. And I want to break down exactly what he talked about. So like I mentioned, he's describing that the interest expense on the debt that America owes, so things such as unfunded liabilities like Social Security, it could be things associated with Medicare, Medicaid. A lot of these interest expense on the debts that we owe, and even treasury securities like government securities, is becoming very rapid over the recent years and even the last decade compared to the tax revenue that we make here in America. So he described how we're now getting at a point where the U.S. might not be able to pay its bills, and that there could be a serious sovereign debt crisis, and how there may not be enough money to pay out Social Security or to pay out for Medicare, Medicaid, and all of these government funded programs. And even pensions may be at risk because they are becoming more underfunded, where there simply isn't enough money to service the promises that have been made by these public service government programs. Now, recently in the United Kingdom, they had a massive sell-off with their long-dated government bonds known as gilts, following policies around unfunded tax cuts. And there was a lot of panic among pension funds because the UK had most of their long-dated bonds lost almost half of their value in only a matter of days. So literally the value of their pension funds went down tremendously because the bond exposure that they had in those particular funds had dwindled down tremendously. Now, with the result of this, the Bank of England actually had to launch an historic intervention to stabilize the UK economy, and they're actually announcing, and they recently have announced, that they are going to implement a 2-week purchase program for long-dated bonds, and they are delaying the selling of any government bonds until the end of October. So essentially what they're doing is a concept called treasury yield control, where it has gotten so serious out there in the United Kingdom, where a lot of people that are managing these pension funds, they probably were over leveraged. It was probably a lot of mismanagement with those funds, and the bonds that had lost a significant amount of value, it really cut down on the growth of the pension plan. And now it's a situation where the government has to step in. They actually have to say that now they're going to buy long dated bonds to be able to help change this situation and improve it for the better. So I definitely think that's a warning for America with our pension plans, and our pension plans here are starting to become more tremendously underfunded just because of all of the issues with the debt crisis that we're experiencing here as well. Now, in the most recent interview with Stanley Druckenmiller, he described how the interest expense on the debt is going to eat up healthcare spending by 2027. By 2047, it's going to eat up all of discretionary spending, and then by 2049, it's going to take up all of Social Security. That's very big when you think about that. So that just simply means that the debt is becoming so large that it's going to prevent the government to be able to serve and help the next generation. And he even said in this interview, he's not even positive about this current generation. So it definitely is a problem that the government, that the Federal Reserve has on their hands. So what I wanted to do here is take a moment to run through some numbers and really show you all what Stanley Druckenmiller was talking about. The interest expense on the debt and how it's becoming so much higher in recent years and how it's going to continue to increase over time. So as you can see here, this is the federal budget of the fiscal year of 2020. And if you look at on the right hand side, you can see the revenues. On the left hand side, you see the expenses, which are called the outlays. Now, 95% of the U.S. government revenues comes in form of simple taxes. So things like individual and corporate income taxes. This does include capital gains tax and also payroll taxes. And as you can see on the left with the expenses, the total was 6.6 trillion. And with the revenues on the right hand side, it was only 3.4 trillion. So you can see in itself, there is a deficit. And all the deficit means is that the government spent more than they actually brought in revenue. A surplus is when they have more revenues in comparison to what they spend for a particular year. Now, I found a shocking statistic regarding the U.S. deficit, and the deficit described how with America, we have been in a deficit with our budget since 2001. So if you look at the last decade, since 2001, we have been spending a lot more than we actually have been bringing in revenue. In fact, also what I found was in the last 50 years, the U.S. has only had a surplus 5 times with their budget. And that is outstanding when you think about that. So it just goes to show that there's not any proper asset allocators that we have working in these different higher positions, and how it is a system that is very driven by just debt and borrowing, and it's a constant cycle to continue to borrow more debt to hopefully end up paying off the previous debt. So it's really crazy when you think about it. And I did also want to go through here. As you can see, this is the budget deficit over, if you look at since 1972, this is pretty much the Congressional Budget Committee. They put together these reports where they kind of break down certain elements of things that are going on within the economy. And as it shows here, with their projections, they state here that the primary total deficits initially shrink as a percentage of the GDP, and then it generally increases, particularly in the second half of the projection period. The aging of the population and the rising cost of healthcare boost primary deficits, net interest outlays, which double as a percentage of GDP over the projection period, further increasing total deficits. So as you can see here, like I mentioned with 2001, you can see how we had a slight increase and how we had a surplus. But if you look literally since that point, it's just been on a downward trend. Even in the current year, this has been the lowest it has ever been. So the deficit is a very serious problem. And another thing that I think you also need to look at as an investor is you'll hear this concept of total debt to total GDP. And all that simply means is the economy, what these economists are doing is they're looking at the total debt that we have here in the US, and then they're comparing that to the total GDP. And what the GDP is the gross domestic product. Think of that as simply the economic output. You want to see that the economy is growing, and that's where you will look for as an indicator. You're going to look at the GDP to see if there are just more productivity in the economy. So as you can see here, this is the total debt to total GDP, and it's really pretty much breaking down that it's only going to get higher, where the debt is going to continue to increase, and it's going to be much higher than the actual growth that we're seeing here in the economy. So it kind of states here how federal debt held by the public is projected to increase in most years in this projection period, reaching 110% of GDP by 2032, higher than it has ever been. In the 2 decades that follow, growing deficits are projected to push federal debt higher still to 185% in 2052. And then the last thing I did want to go over is this is the U.S. debt clock. So this is really just breaking down the different debts that we have here in the economy and giving you a visualization of the revenues as well. And as you can see here, if you look on the right hand side, I only want you to look at 2 areas. I want you to look where you see here with the U.S. federal tax revenue. Our revenue is only right now currently as of October 11th, 2022, $4.8 trillion is what the U.S. has accumulated. But if you look here at the U.S. national debt, we're well over 30 trillion. We're at $31 trillion. So that shows you right there, it's a deficit. There's not enough revenue to service the debt. Another number that I really pay attention to is the total debt to GDP ratio. If you look all the way to the right and you look under local debt, you'll see the total debt to GDP ratio is 139.66%. This is the highest that it has been. Even if you look to the left-hand side and you look at the U.S. federal debt to GDP ratio, it shows that in 2000 we were somewhere around 56.04%. And it also kind of gives you a comparison of looking at the federal debt compared to the GDP ratio, and it's about 125%. But all this is showing you is that the debt is constantly rising and the revenue is not increasing at the same rate of the amount of debt that America brings in. So I definitely think some things to keep in mind as an investor is, okay, what can they do to help improve this? And the only thing that I think about is they can cut their spending. They can find ways of how they can reduce their discretionary spending. Even with the mandatory spending, they have to find ways to create more value and to get more economic output out of the society. They can raise taxes, but usually a lot of people don't like these different things because it doesn't get the president reelected. It doesn't win votes. What's probably going to happen for years to come, we are going to end up moving back into quantitative easing. Right now we're in a tightening environment, but we're probably going to go back to a situation where they're going to just constantly keep borrowing debt to try to pay off the previous debt, and then just really create quantitative easing where they're going to lower interest rates and they're going to find ways to try to do as best as they can to solve this problem. But I definitely think as an investor, the best thing you can do is make sure that you have insurance. You got to make sure that you have hard assets. Now, I'm not providing any recommendations. I'm not giving any financial advice. This is not a recommendation to buy or sell any security, but you do need to look at hard assets such as precious metals, gold, silver, looking at ways that you can be able to get a small percentage towards Bitcoin, getting exposure to those different asset classes, and really finding ways to have insurance against this fiat situation that we have, the fiat Ponzi, as my great friend Greg Foss would like to say. You got to find ways that you can hedge against that, because the dollar is just continuing to be a melting ice cube. And when you think about society and you think about the amount of debt that we have as a nation, it's really going to create a lot of issues down the line, where I can understand why Stanley Druckenmiller has said that the interest expense on the debt is becoming much higher than simply the revenue that we're bringing in. And even if you look at the interest expense within this national debt clock, it really shows here that the interest on the debt is $447 billion. Keep in mind, the graph that I showed previously with the federal budget for the fiscal year of 2020, the net interest was only at $345 billion. So that is also increasing. So that's the reason why he said that. That is the reason why we are potentially going to be in a recession going into 2023 sometime throughout the year. No one knows the timing, but you definitely have to prepare yourself as an investor. And I hope this video was informative for you all. If you all can continue to please like, subscribe, and share this video. Continue to share it with your family and friends. Don't forget to hit that notification bell below so you can be notified every week when I drop content. And I thank you all so much for watching, and take care.